Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Nowadays we are talking about the basics of when we are done with field interviews and data collection. What do we do with the data, especially how do we describe, prepare data for our analysis. In previous lecture we have seen that we have to do data editing. Data editing is done to ensure accuracy, simplicity, completeness, availability of data for further analysis, basics and advanced analysis, and these are the criteria on which we have to do data editing. And data editing can be done at various stages. First thing that we can do as data editing is to do data editing at field level. What do we do in the field is basically either we use a callback method or we use a re-interviewing. And we have seen that callback method can be used when you ask as a supervisor to your researcher to call back what was answered by the respondent on that particular question. And if your callback rate is high, and if you think that that might create a problem for the precision of your data availability, what you do, you basically go and re-interview. And re-interviewing is done when you have doubts on your data, precision of your data, the figures, the numbers that you get for your numerical or categorical data, and you think that your researchers have done that armchair interviewing, that they have done few questionnaires filled in the field, and based on the averages that they are getting, they are actually doing the data analysis sitting somewhere else rather than interviewing. This is one thing. Secondly, callback is also important when a researcher or a field person who is doing data collection might have done some coding or short forms or abbreviations for their own sake, for the ease of their own in hurry when they are collecting data on everyday basis. So you as a research supervisor or you as a field supervisor might not be in a better position to understand those abbreviations. So you have to immediately ask to call back from that particular researcher or field assistant so that he or she can recall and call back that what has been written, what does that mean, how do you understand that. If these things are not done timely or time to time during the whole data collection process, if your project is long and you have long term or more data collection, then you will be in a position not to identify what are these simple abbreviations or other things or symbols meant for. So this actually leads you to misinterpret your data, or you might not be, as a research or field supervisor, be unable to understand your data as a whole. So this can create problem for you. And if you think that the data collected by the field assistants or research assistant is not appropriate and you're finding dissimilarities and problematic stuff when you enter the data and when you look at the data within the field, what you can do is to re-interview. And as a rule of thumb, it is normally said that you can choose between 8 to 10% of your sample and you do a re-interviewing. Again, the sample selection can be depend on simple random method or random sampling or whatever kind of techniques you are using for your main data collection, and based on that 10% you can verify, validate and ensure the accuracy of the data. And that you have to do it during the field. Once you don't do that and the data is collected and come back to the offices, then you do is called central editing. Central editing can be done in various forms. One simple form is that if your data is small, not large enough, your questionnaire is simple, then you can give it to only one editor who can sit and think and talk about and understand what are the discrepancies that exist in data. But if your questionnaire is large and your project is large, getting more informed data, then what you can do, according to section wise, you get more than 2 or more than 1 editor for your data accuracy, completeness and simplification. And these editors then edit the data based on the information that is available to them, based on the instructions that is provided to those who are collecting data and those who are coding data. Definitely they have to rely on what is available to them. Definitely they have to think twice before guessing any number for any particular variable. They have to use a same design and format when they are making changes or altering the data. They have to sign them, they have to put them a date at particular place so that one can understand that there is their initials that are there and for what particular day or date they have done that change, so that it can be traced back easily. And we have also started in our previous lecture about how coding can be done and why it is important. We start from coding. What is a code book? We have also seen in our previous lecture that code book involves assigning numbers of other symbols to answers so that the responses can be grouped into a limited number of categories. And we have seen examples from that from categorical data, that is hatchback, Sullivan and state, and we have also seen example from gender, that is male and female. In coding, categories are the partitions of a data set of a given variable. For example, for instance, if the variable is gender, the categories can be male and female. And then we can code them, 1 is equal to male, 2 is equal to female. Categorization is the process of using rules. You use rules to partition a body of data. Both closed and open-ended question must be coded. This is very important, that we have to understand that open-ended question and closed-ended question both must be coded. So not only open-ended but closed-ended question must be coded. So closed-ended question example is gender, that is male, female, and we know male we give it 1, female we give 2. So this is how we code closed-ended. Gender, male, female, and we have code. And open-ended question, what is your opinion about newly formed government in Pakistan? So whatever is opinion, you can code them accordingly, 1, 2, 3, and that is very important to do it, because if you don't do it, then that will create problem for you to analyze your data. Numeric coding simplifies the researcher's task in converting a nominal variable like gender to a dummy variable. So instead of converting it to dummy, you give it a numerical coding. So dummy can be 0, 1, and 0, 1 when you do regression analysis, don't want to go into this detail, but just for simplicity, if you do simple regression, 0 means that all the observation that includes 0 must not be included. So the only regression that will be run is on 1. So that's the difference between dummy variable and when you give a numerical coding. So numerical coding simplifies the researcher's task in converting a nominal variable like gender to a dummy variable. So you have to convert them into code, numeric code, so that you will be in a position to see how your variable is dummy or not. A code book contains each variable in the study and specifies the application of coding rules to the variable. You have to make a separate code book which must contain each and every variable that is available in your research and that you are coding using one or the other rules. It is used by the researcher or research staff to promote more accurate and more efficient data entry. It is helpful when you are entering data to use the codebook and enter data accordingly. So it increases efficiency of data entry and it ensures accuracy of data entry using the codes that is specified for each and every variable and question that you are interested to get answer to using your questionnaire. It is the definite source of locating the positions of variable in the data file during analysis. So coding is also important. It is a definite source of locating the position of variables in the data file. So where in the data file the variables are located, you will be in a better position to locate through using your code books. That the codes that you are given to the variable, you will be in a better position to understand that when you code them in your data. So this is a simple example of a sample code book. So let's look at, for example, this simple gender matrix. So this is question 3, this is variable number 5, then code description for gender, and then the variable name is gender. Code description: 1 is equal to male, 2 is equal to female, 9 is equal to when if it is missing. If somehow you miss the gender aspect and you are unsure about it, then the missing number can be filled in gender with 9. Let's see the marital status. So you have question number 4, you have variable number 6, you have variable name as marital, and under marital status you have married, which is equal to 1, you have widow or widower, that is equal to 2, you have divorced, equal to 3, separated, equal to 4, never married, equal to 5, and if you have missing value for some or the other responses, you have 9 for it. And whenever it comes 9, you understand that 9 stands for missing, not only in marital status but in gender also. So if you are separating two variables based on marital status and gender, 9 shows you that the value for this is missing. Then again you see, let's say, housing. So this is your question number 5, this is your variable number 7, name of the variable is housing, and then you have own or rent. Number 1 is own, 2 is rent, 3 is provided, 9 is missing. So you have 3 categories: you own the house, you rent the house, or your company has provided it but you don't have to pay rent because company is paying rent. These are 3 categories, and the last category is either if you don't find any response to it, it is missing, and missing is equal to 9. So now under gender, marital status and housing, you have one thing common, that whenever you enter the variables into your Excel sheet or columns of other software that you use to analyze your data, what you get is that whenever 9 number comes, unless it is specified in some different forms, for example for gender, marital status and housing, it is always means that the value is missing. This is how you understand your coding. For example, for your question number 1, variable number 3, you have 5-digit zip code for missing, that is 99999, 5 times 9. So that you have to understand that for any missing number, your zip code is 5 times 9. But for gender, marital status, housing, you have 9 only once. And for your question number 2, which is your variable number 4, that is birth, if there is missing, then you have to have 2-year birth date, that is 2 times 9. So this is how you codify various things to make your understanding clear, to make your code book understandable, and to enter things in a way that software can also recognize and identify, and you can also be in a position to identify what are the codes that you are using for available data and what are the codes that you are using for missing data. These are very important aspects of coding your data. If you do coding properly, you will be in a better position to understand every single aspect of your data, so that you can move smoothly when you are entering data, you can move smoothly when you are editing data, you can move smoothly when you check for data errors and omissions, and you can also do smooth, simple and easy analysis of your data in basic terms like summary, statistics and all other things. This is where codebook is very important. This is where codebook comes in the scene, and this is how codebook help a researcher to identify mistakes, errors and omissions in the data, to delete them accordingly, and to make data simple, accurate, reliable and valid and available for analysis. So this was one of the sample of codebook. Now we will be talking about pre-coding. Pre-coding means assigning codebook codes to variables in a study and recording them on the questionnaire. So pre-coding is actually assigning the codebook codes to variables. So once you have made a code book, now you have your questionnaire. This is a code book where you have assigned variable name and code. So this is where you have used your code book. Now you have questionnaire, and in your questionnaire you have question 1, you have question 2, you have question 3 and so on. So for every question, whatever variable you are using, you have to go back to your code book. You have to look into the code book for that particular question and the variable that you are identifying, and for that variable you have to take what is the name of the variable and what are the codes. And if it is about what is your gender, then definitely it must be male with a circle or this kind of rectangle, and female with a circle or this kind of rectangle to cross or to tick. And here you actually code with name of variable, that is gender. So male is equal to 1, female is equal to 2, and whenever it is tick male, you actually take 1 here, so that your coding can also be classified. So pre-coding is basically once you made your code book, you assign the code book's code to your variables in a study and you record them on your questionnaire. With the pre-coded instruments, the codes for variable categories are accessible directly from the questionnaire. Now you are in an easy position to access your codes through questionnaire. By using questionnaire, you will be in a better position to actually use the code you have used in pre-coding. Now you can see the sample of pre-coded instrument, which is easy for you to understand and which is easy for you to fulfill your questionnaire when you are in the field. What is the zip code for your residence? We have somehow fixed it here. So zip code for your residence is here we have used like 1 and 2. So you have to give here the code that you have fixed. What is your year of birth? So 1975. Gender, male and female. Indicate your number of choice here. So here you put 1. So it means that it is male. What is your marital status? So suppose if it is ticked at divorced, you put it 3 here. Do you own or rent your primary residence? Rent. So indicate your choice number, it is 2. This is how you will be in a better position to immediately understand what is available for you in your data set. This is how you codify them. So the important thing that you can understand, or that as a researcher you can understand, is that this is question. In question you have your variable, that is birth, which is you are interested in, and here is your code for that particular variable. Again, this is question, what is your gender, then these are the choices available, and then here is your code that you are using for gender. Now you have full-fledged question, what is your marital status, answers are provided, pre-coded answer are provided, and within pre-coded answer whatever is marked you can provide here under your code so that you can understand the answer. Similar is the case with your this question, your pre-coded answer are provided and here you can put the code. Now you can link the pre-coded instrument with that of this sample code book. So for example, we have given question number, we given variable number, we have given code description, and we have given variable name. So if you see, we have question number, we have variable name, we have code category, and here we are providing code. So every single thing that you have covered in your code book, it's actually covered in your questionnaire, and now from your questionnaire you are in a better position to understand your whole data sets. This is one of the important aspect of your code book and how it relates to pre-coded book or pre-coded instrument. That was the examples that I provided for closed-ended question, how to code open-ended question. One of the primary reasons for using open-ended question is that insufficient information or lack of a hypothesis may prohibit preparing response categories in advance. Researchers are forced to categorize responses after the data are collected. So if you are unable to categorize the open-ended question, you will not be in a position to clearly state your hypothesis and then you test it using analysis of your data. So this is very important to also code open-ended question. In the figure on the next slide that I'll show you, question 6 illustrates the use of an open-ended question. After preliminary evaluation, response categories were created for that item. They can be seen in the code book. You can also put them in the code book. Preliminary evaluation response categories were created for that item. Let's look at what does this slide mean when we look at the coding of an open-ended question. So your question is, what prompted you to purchase your most recent life insurance? What encouraged you? इस सवाल में ये सीधी सी बात आपको बताई गई है कि किन चीज़ों पर भरोसा करके, किन चीज़ों के ऊपर अंडरस्टैंडिंग करके, किन चीज़ों को जहन में लाकर आपने ये सोचा कि मुझे लाइफ इंश्योरेंस खरीदनी चाहिए. And when you decided that you have to buy life insurance, what are the factors that prompted you? So here you can provide your response as an open-ended question. So number 1, you have 6, which is actually question number, and then you code it that reasons for purchase. Number 1 is equal to mentioned, number 2 is equal to not mentioned. What if it is mentioned? So bought home, then the variable name, birth of child, then the variable code, death of relative or friend, then the code, promoted, code, change job career, this one, paid colleges, acquired assets, retired, change, this, and then you have other. So these are the categories in which you can describe the open-ended question responses, and you can codify them. So he or she can answer in various ways. For example, I buy life insurance or the recent life insurance policy because I have promoted. So let's look at this. So the name of the variable is promo, code is 11. So whenever you put 11 into 8, you can actually understand that this is your answer, that because you get promoted, so you need life insurance, or you get a new business started, so it is 17. So here you put 17, and now you get a reason for your question 6, that because you started a new business, so you have to get into this life insurance thing. So this is how your open-ended questions can also be codified based on various responses that you get. Now we will see the slide again. So one of the primary reasons for using open-ended question, coding for open-ended question, is that insufficient information or lack of a hypothesis prohibits preparing response categories in advance. Because you don't know what kind of answers you are going to get, so you cannot prepare in advance the code book for your open-ended question. So what you do, researchers are forced to categorize responses after the data are collected. So once you get your data collected, you can actually code them after the data is collected. So what you do, you basically categorize responses. So number 1, you have bought home, you have got a birth child, you've got promoted, you change your job or career, your marital status change, you got retired, you expanded your business, you started new business. So these are various responses that you get because one or the other reason, and then you go for life insurance. So once you want to code open-ended question, this is relatively difficult to do it beforehand, like in closed-ended question. You can do coding in closed-ended questions beforehand, before going into the field. But for open-ended questions, it's difficult for a researcher to hypothesize any of the answer that one might get. So the responses can be varies. So closed-ended questions, we have, let's say, maximum of 5 responses. But if you see here, we have almost 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 responses. It can be this or that. It can be this. It can be mixture of anything. So you have to see that open-ended question can not be coded simply before when you are doing a code book. So one primary reason for using coding open-ended question is that insufficient information or lack of a hypothesis may prohibit preparing response categories in advance. So you are not in a position to prepare advanced categories before you do data collection. So what you are forced to do as the researcher is to categorize responses after the data is collected. So once you collected the data, you go to the open question of each and every questionnaire, and then based on the responses that you get, you try to codify them into various categories, like we have had around 12-13 categories for that particular life insurance question. In the figure on the slide, question 6 illustrate an open-ended question. We have seen after preliminary evaluation, response categories were created for that item. So once you have evaluated the answer to that particular question, you have created response categories. They are between 12 and 15, and that can be seen in the code book. Now you can add it in the code book. So these are the response categories that we have created for our particular question number 6, and this is how we can do coding of an open-ended question. What are the rules of coding? Categories should be appropriate to the research problem. Categories should be mutually exclusive. Categories should be exhaustive. List should include each and every aspect. It should not end up with 2 or 3 responses and the rest of the responses be included in others, where you are unable to answer anything. So it should be exhaustive, like in our previous example that we have 15 or 16 categories where we can have as much responses as possible. So these are the things that we have to consider. For example, every option in the category set is defined in terms of one concept or construct. So we have to create these 4 characteristics within coding rules for open-ended or closed-ended. Exhaustive list, mutually exclusive, appropriate to the research problem, and derived from one classification principle. We have to derive from one classification principle. For example, every option in the category set is defined in terms of one concept or construct. We don't have to mix and match concepts and construct for every variable. So these are the 4 important pillars of your coding rules. If they are followed, then your coding rules are important, understandable enough, and help you to codify your data in a sense that will increase the understanding of the data. That also helps you to get your data into nice format, desirable format, so that you can do nice, simple and advanced analysis of your data. Content analysis. Content analysis measures the semantic content or what the aspect of a message. It is also used for open-ended question. So this is predominantly not in quantitative but qualitative studies, that you get a long answer for open-ended questions and then you do content analysis. Normally Atlas TI or NVivo is used, for example, for policy level studies, where you get responses from policymakers, stakeholders on one or the other question, and then you do content analysis. And these contents are actually codified into various forms and formats, like we have seen in our previous example, into exhaustive list, where you cannot say 2 or 3 things and then everything else is put in others, but you put every response into different category and you code them, and that helps you actually to understand the various responses provided by the stakeholders or the people you are interviewing. So content analysis is also an important aspect of when you do ask open-ended question. What can be the types of content analysis? I'll not go into much of the details because most of us are not going in detail of these content analysis, mostly because we are using either primary or secondary data, or secondly, we are not intended to do that because most of us might not go into the type of research which is needed for business or management kind of studies, especially in human resources also. So that's why we have to just understand what is syntactical, referential, propositional, and thematic. So these are the type of content analysis we do. It is easy to understand. For example, syntactical can be words, phrases, sentences, or paragraphs. So this is how we do analysis, by using words or phrases or sentences or paragraphs that we get as an answer to a particular question. Referential are described by words, phrases, and sentences, and maybe objects, events, or persons, like 3 Miles Island. So this is one example of referential, that you are referred to a particular place like 3 Miles Island. Propositional are assertions about an object, event, or person. Magazine saves rupees 3,000 per month. For example, in Pakistan, if you're talking about Herald or Pakistan's Newsweek, so you are talking about that it can save this or that amount of money when you want to get political insight of Pakistan, economic insight of Pakistan, and you can want to read magazines, so you can save these kind of money by reading this or that particular magazine. So this is how you can use propositional content analysis. And then you have thematic. Topics contained within and across text. For example, reflecting a temporal theme. For example, I used to purchase product A. I really like the new packaging of product B, where you use thematic things. So what you eat in your lunch, and you do a thematic answer that I used to eat biryani or this thing, but because of the packaging I might be shifting to that. So this is how you do thematic content analysis. I'm just giving you simple examples. You can also go through it, and you can also see in various books you can find content analysis and all, especially in NVivo and Atlas TI's guidebook for software. You can also find some examples and explanation of these kind of content analysis. Handling don't know responses. In the beginning of previous lecture, I've also talked about when you get an answer which says I don't know, then how you handle these while you code them, while you analyze them. When the number of don't know responses is low, it's not a problem. So that's very simple. If it is low, it's not a problem, and it depends what is low for a particular researcher. It also depends on the size of your project, on the size of sample, and your response rate. How large is your project, how large is your data set, and how much is your response rate versus how many questions have this answer called don't know. You give him a DK, which means don't know. However, if there are several given, it may mean that the question was poorly designed, number one. It may be too sensitive, number two, or too challenging for the respondent to answer. The best way to deal with undesired don't know answer is to design better questions at the beginning. You have to think that how to change your question, and if DK response is legitimate, it should be kept as a separate reply category. If you think that it is a separate category, put it in separate category. So one controversial statement is this third statement, that the best way to deal with undesired don't know answer is to design better questions at the beginning. I mean, once you get that answer, how you can redesign just one or two more questions again, and you go again and again to collect data. Here come the role of piloting. We have a study that piloting or pilot study is also important for verifying the questionnaire that you want to use to collect your responses or to get your data. And here comes the importance of pilot studies, that when you go and ask during your pilot study and you get much of the answers as don't know, then you definitely have the chance to think about whether you are asking the question in an appropriate and right way. If this is the case, then whether it is making sense or not. If it is not, then how to rephrase, reframe, redesign your question individually so that its sensitivity can be understood by the respondent and he or she may reply it nicely. Or if it is not the case, then he or she might say it in open way, that how he or she is understanding the question and how the respondent is replying. So this is how piloting is linked to what you are intended to get as an answer to it. So that's the best way to deal with undesired decay answer, is to design better questions at the beginning. And by beginning means once you have conducted piloting. If you are in a position that you will not get much of the good answer about your one or the other question, after piloting you have to think about that question seriously, carefully, and understand the sensitivity involved in that question, or why a respondent is unable to answer. Maybe there is a problem of understanding, or there is other legitimate issues related to that particular question. And if it is legitimate that you are getting don't know answer and it is justified, then you have to make a separate category with definitely a name and a code of that particular category, so that you can understand when you are entering your data into your Excel sheet or any other sheet where you want to do analysis of your data. Once we are in a position to prepare code book, to see pre-coding, to understand pre-coding, and then we are in a position to handle these difficult answer like don't know answer, and we have seen that it is legitimate, or if it is not, we have made changes in our questionnaire according to how respondents can understand and link the sensitivity of that question. Then we are in a better position to actually enter the data into the software that we are using, and we are in a better position to analyze it. And this analysis is actually common for either your data is quantitative or qualitative. You have to get frequencies. Frequency actually tells that with what extent a particular observation or a particular variable or particular concern is coming into your questionnaire or into your data. For example, unit sale increase is 5%, 6%, 7%, 8%, 9% and total. And then we have, so here we have unit sale increase in percentage, we have frequency, we have percentage, and we have cumulative percentage. So this is actually our variable, and this frequency tells us that how much number of time a particular element of the variable, is appearing in the data we are. So the variable says that unit increase in sale in terms of percentage is 5%, 6%, 7%, 8%, 9%. So how many units are sold at 5%? Frequency is 1. and because the total number is 9, so the percentage is 11.1%. 6 number of frequencies, that 2 units are sold on 6%, or they have increased by 6%, so their frequency is 22.2%. 7 is 3%, so their frequency is 33.3%. 8 is 2%, so it is 22.2%. 9 is 1%, so it's 11.1%. And if you add them up, you will get 100% of the results. And if you add them up, you actually get the total number. 1 plus 2, 3, 3 plus 3, 6, 2, 8, and 1, 9. And if you just want to get, let's say, 11.1, what you do, you basically divide 1 by 9 and multiply it by 100. So you can be in a position to get easily this number. And same for, let's say, 2 by 9 into 100, 3 by 9 into 100, and you get this percentage. So what is the difference between percentage and cumulative percentage is that you actually add your first and second and you get second percentage. So your first percentage remains as it is, and you add up your first and second percentage, you get second percentage in cumulative. You get second and third added and you get this percentage. You get third and fourth added and you get this percentage, and you get this and this added and you get this percentage. So for example, 11.1 into 22.2, you get 33.3. So 33.3 is added into 33.3. So it is 66 they called it 7, just round off so that they can get 100 out of it. And then if you add the next into it, that is 22.2, so it is 988.9, which is this one. And if you add 11.1, you get actually what you have total, that is 100%. So cumulative percentage is basically accumulation, addition of each percentage into it while you get the 100%. This is how you calculate frequencies. Frequencies actually guides you to tell how many times a particular unit, a particular variable of measure comes into your data. So for example, if a unit sale has increased by 5%, then you want to know how much time it included in your data. You can get it through frequency table by saying that it included only once. And if you want to understand how much time it is 7%, then you can say it is 3 times. And based on that, you can calculate percentage by simple formula of dividing your number of frequency with the total number of observations multiplied by 100. And if you combine percentages, you can get cumulative percentage. This is how you can define your frequencies table. What is a frequency table? We have already seen that it is arrays of category codes from lowest value to highest value, with columns for count, percent, percent adjusted for missing values, and cumulative percent. So we have percentage, cumulative percentage are variable, and its frequency are the number of time it appears in our data. A frequency distribution is an ordered array of all values of a variable. It is an ordered way of describing your variable. So with how much order or with how much time does a particular variable appears in your data. The data can be assigned numerical value. In this case, the actual percentage unit sales increased recorded. So we have seen that percentage unit in sale is increased. So this is how we can understand our frequencies or frequency table. It is to discover how many manufacturers were in each unit sales increase category. Read the frequency column. We have to read the frequency column that how many manufacturers were there in unit cell increase category. So if it is 5%, we can see how many were there. If it is 6%, then we can see how many were there. So for example, for that particular category of 5, we have 1 frequency. For 6, we have 2 frequency. For 7, we have 3. 8, we have 2. And for 9, we have 1. 9 means that there is a unit sale increase in percent, which is 9%. We have 1 under this frequency. So this first line explains us to discover how many manufacturers were in each unit sale increase category. We have to read the frequency column. The cumulative percentage reveals the number of manufacturers that provided a response and any others that preceded in it in the table. So we have the preceding into it. So we add first versus 2, we add these 2 versus 3, we add these 3 versus 4, and we have these 4 plus 5. This column is helpful when the data have an underlying order. If it is an ordered data, then cumulative percentage is also very important. The proportion is the percentage of elements in the distribution that a criterion. So that we already seen that it basically explains the each element's contribution into it. In the example, the criterion is the origin of manufacturing, that how the manufacture is originated. So it is 5% or 6% or 7%, 8% or 9%. Frequency tables we have seen. Now we want to see the distribution. I hope you are in a position to see the graph and then this simple nice curvy or parabolic line into it. This actually describes a simple distribution of one or the other variable. And on our left side we have described the frequency, and here is also the frequency or the percentage that is described. So this is the same table that we have described in frequency table, and now we are actually getting this distribution. This is the frequency that it might occur 1 time, it might occur 2 times, or it might occur 3 times, and this is the percentage. There is 5, 6, 7, 8 and 9, and we have seen that 5 is 1%, 6% is 2 times, 7% is 3 times, 8% again 2 times, and 9% again 1 time. If you see this table, that 9% is 1 time, 8 2 times, 7 3 times, 6 2 times, 5 1 time. So you can also confirm 5 1 time, 6 2 times, 8 2 times, 9 1 times, and then 7 3 times. So this is how distributions can help us to understand the distribution pattern of our data using frequency tables. What does distributions using frequency tables describes or make us understand? Many variables of interest that researchers will measure will have distribution that approximates a standard normal distribution. This is known as standard and normal distribution, that each category is standardized and it got normal share in or kind of equal share into each category. A standard normal distribution is a special case of the normal distribution in which all values are given standard scores. So every value got a standard score and every value got a standard share into it. The distribution has a mean of 0 and a standard deviation of 1. Mean is average and standard deviation you also know. So these are simple basic concepts of basic statistics that you can definitely read in any of the statistics book. A standard score conveys how many standard deviation units a case is above or below the mean. So if you know the average of that, then you can understand how below the average you are or how above the average you are, and that is also known as z-score. So the distance of a mean from a particular average or a mean. The z-score being standardized allows the comparison of the results of different normal distribution. So this standard score actually allows us to standardize and compare the normal distributions of various variables. Now we have measure of central tendency, whether they are moving towards center or not, whether our mean, median and mode are close to center or they are far away from center. So we have three important concepts included in it. First is mean, second is median, and third is mode. So we have to understand these three important aspects of measures of central tendency. Central tendency is basically measure of location, where the particular number located in your statistical analysis. The common measure of central tendency includes mean, median, mode, and we have had it. The mean is arithmetic average of a data distribution. It is average of the data distribution you have when you get something out of it. So the simple way of calculating average is that you have, let's say, response 2, 3, 2, 4, 2, 5, 5, 6, 4, 5, and you simply do, you add them. 6, 9, 11, 13, 18, 24 and 32, and let's say we have had 6, 38. So 38 is our total of this whatever variable we have, and let's count it now. 1, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 observations. We have 9 observation of 8. And now by dividing 9 with that, whatever number we get, let's say 4.2 or something, let's say we are assuming that it is 4.5. So this is our mean. So the mean is arithmetic average of a data distribution. So this was our data distribution, and we add them together and divided by the number of observation become our arithmetic means or average. The median is the midpoint of a data distribution. The midpoint of data distribution. So let's say we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And if we see 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, so this is becoming our central point. So this is the median of the central point or the central point of our data. What is the mode? It is the most frequently occurring value in a distribution. There may be more than one mode in a distribution. So if you see 2, 2, 2 is occurring more time, and also 6 and 6. So these are the two numbers that are occurring more than once in our distribution. When there is more than one score that has the highest yet equal frequency, the distribution is bimodal or multimodal. So if we add, or if we know that our data has more than similar number but more than once they are occurring, so we can call it that our data is bimodal or multimodal in nature. So before we end up, I just want to summarize today's lecture, that we have started with coding. What is code book? We have discussed what is the importance of code book, why do we have to use it, so that we can understand our data easily and nicely. Then we have also read about pre-coding. What is pre-coding? It is actually diverting the codes of codebook to questionnaire, so that we will be in a better position to not only understand the questions that are there in the questionnaire, but we can also understand the codes of the codebook. and that will help us to enter our data in our analysis software, and we'll be in a better position to analyze data. Then we have talked about the frequencies, distribution, frequency tables, measure of central tendency, that are the very basics of our statistical summary or descriptive analysis for whatever data we have had with us. We have seen that frequency table actually tells us about the distribution, how equally or unequally every distributed variable has got place in, or how much frequently it is occurring when we are analyzing the variable. And then we have three measures of central tendency, which is arithmetic means or average, then mean, median, and mode. These three are important aspects, and we have seen through the basic definitions of these three that they are also able us to understand our data, the frequency and occurrence of each variable and observation in the data. This is how we are in a position to find our questionnaire in a relevant code book. That code book is used to edit and enter and describe our data, and after that we are in a position to see our data in nice frequency and distribution tables, and to add them up to these things is the mean, arithmetic average, and all these things, so that we can understand basics of what is available with us in terms of our data through questionnaires. I stop it here, and we will start from this in the next lecture. Thank you very much for your attention, and Allah Hafiz.